Good afternoon, and welcome back to the Garden of Grace devotion. My name is Pastor Katie, and I'm one of the pastors at Trinity Lutheran Church in Lilburn, Georgia. Today, I'd like to share some thoughts with you based on a devotion I read a few weeks ago from the God Pause online devotion that comes out of Luther Seminary. It's a devotion that was based on a lectionary text from a couple of weeks ago from Exodus chapter 16, verses 2 to 4 and 9 to 15. This passage is about the Israelites in the wilderness, and it reads, "The whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, 'If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill the whole assembly with hunger.' Then the Lord said to Moses, 'I am going to rain bread from heaven for you, and each day the people shall go out and gather enough for that day. In that way I will test them, whether they will follow my instruction or not.' Then Moses said to Aaron, 'Say to the whole congregation of the Israelites, draw near to the Lord, for he has heard your complaining.' And as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the Israelites, they looked toward the wilderness, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. The Lord spoke to Moses and said, 'I have heard the complaining of the Israelites. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God.' In the evening, quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a fine, flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, 'What is it?' For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, 'It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat.'" So many different things stand out to me about this passage. But particularly as I read the reflection a few weeks ago, it stuck out to me that the Israelites were in a place they'd never been before. They were longing for where they used to be, even though where they used to be was pretty terrible. They were longing for what was familiar. The passage reads, "The whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron," the whole assembly. They were in an unfamiliar place, somewhere they hadn't been before, and they were hungry. So they longed for what they'd known, even though what they'd known was pretty terrible. So they were complaining against Moses and Aaron and saying, "You should have left us where we were instead of where we are right now." They needed a solution. They were hungry. And there was another way. Besides going back to what they'd known or not having anything in the moment, there was another way, a door number 3 of sorts. In the midst of their grumbling, something incredible happens. When the Israelites are in a place they've never been before, God nourishes them with a food that they've never had before. God didn't feed them in the ways that they were used to. In the midst of their time in the wilderness, in an unfamiliar land, God fed them with a different kind of bread they hadn't had before. It was called manna, which means, what is it? Did you know that? The word manna, the bread that God gave the Israelites, is called manna because the meaning of that word is, what is it? Oh dear, there's some thunder. When I read this devotion a few weeks ago, it stuck with me. I was taken with the idea of how when the people were in the wilderness in an unfamiliar place, God nourished them in ways that they hadn't been nourished before. God made a layer of dew around the camp in the morning. When the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a fine, flaky substance. In the evening, quails came. Quails came, and so they had food there as well. And in the morning, there was a layer of dew around the camp. And when the dew lifted, there was bread. Each morning, the bread came anew. Each evening, the quail came anew. God provided for them what they needed in an unfamiliar time and place, and they were nourished, and they were filled. And I was just, got an ant bite, sorry. Over the past week and a half, it has felt as though my family has been in a wilderness of sorts. And we have been nourished by many of the things that have been put into place at Trinity over the past year and a half to serve from a distance. I've been home quarantining. However, I have attended worship the last 2 Sundays. A friend of mine went to drive-through communion last weekend for us and delivered 4 communion boats to our front porch. We were nourished. We have felt your prayers, appreciated your phone calls, and food that has been dropped off on our front porch. I'm not entirely used to being the one who is being served or tended to. I'm usually the one going out in the rain to seek to serve if needed, to meet people where they are. It is a different experience to be sitting inside of my home, looking out through the window at the rain coming down, seeing a pair of headlights and food being brought to the front porch, waving through the window. We, my family and I, are being nourished in ways that we haven't before, and I am thankful. And I'm finding that gratitude, giving thanks to God for the gifts we've been given each day, is a method of meaningful nourishment for the soul. Like the Israelites in the wilderness, when I find myself in a place I don't want to be, or dealing with something I don't want to be dealing with, it can be easy for me to think about what I don't have, or where I'd like to be and I'm not. So easy to think about that. It's in these moments that I'm trying to shift from complaining to gratitude. First acknowledging my disappointment and frustration and sadness, then shifting for a moment to gratitude. Instead of thinking about what I don't have, in my better moments, with God's help, I'm trying to shift my attention to what I do have, to what I'm thankful for. The more difficult the day, the more important it seems that gratitude list becomes. So in this moment, I am giving thanks that I am being nourished in ways that I haven't before. As I think about the last year and a half of what has seemed to be a wilderness experience for many of us, I can think about many ways that I have been nourished by God that I hadn't before. I wonder if you can think of some of those ways too. How have you been nourished by God as you have found yourself in wilderness circumstances? Are there things that you can give thanks for, even the most basic things, during times of struggle or trial? I wanted to offer a brief update for our family. First of all, thank you so much for the prayers and the meals. It's been so helpful. Abby is doing much better. She did her quarantine period after she was diagnosed with COVID, and she felt pretty terrible for a few days, and now is feeling much better. She, she still gets tired rather easily, but she's doing great. So she completed her quarantine period and she's back at school. Lily never had any symptoms and tested negative with the long-range test, so she is back at school. My husband is doing well. He didn't have any symptoms, he tested negative, and he's vaccinated, so he is doing fine. I started having symptoms a week ago yesterday. Low-grade fever and a slew of other symptoms, to where I didn't feel terrible, but I didn't feel good. So I did a COVID test and it was negative, and they're not sure what to make of that. So they did want me to go ahead, because of my symptoms and my exposure to Abby, they wanted me to go ahead and quarantine until this coming Friday. So still having the low grade temperature, still don't feel great, but I am working from home, so feel free to reach out, and thank you again so much for the continued prayers. God's peace be with you. Take care.